invisible to the outside world. We're talking about high-functioning depression. Usually when we think about depression, we picture someone who literally can't get out of bed, someone visibly overwhelmed by life. But what happens when the person suffering is the exact same person organizing the meetings, acing the exams, and literally always showing up on time? Throughout this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of this hidden struggle and really explore the intense, invisible weight that so many people carry around every single day.
Okay, let's dive into this. Do you ever feel like you're wasting your time, even when you're actively achieving your goals? It's such an exhausting paradox, right? Research actually points out that one of the very first signs of high-functioning depression is this intense obsession with time. You could be totally crushing your obligations, hitting all your targets, maybe even picking up a new hobby or a side hustle. But deep down, it all just feels kind of useless. You're constantly left wondering if all the time you're pouring into these activities is even worth it. It's like being on a mental treadmill that just never ever turns off.
And that brings us to the illusion of being fine. I want you to think of high-functioning depression like a massive iceberg. Society, your friends, coworkers, even your family, they only see the tiny tip of that iceberg sitting above the water. But underneath the surface, hidden away in the dark, there's this intense, incredibly heavy emotional struggle going on. You are holding the whole shebang together on the outside while completely falling apart on the inside.
Psychologists often associate this specific experience with a condition called dysthymia. Basically, this is a prolonged state of depression. But the absolute key differentiator here from clinical depression is that people dealing with high-functioning depression don't necessarily appear helpless. You'll still drag yourself out of bed, go to work, go to school, and do whatever needs to be done. But make no mistake, it drastically lowers your actual quality of life. It completely drains your interest in practically everything, including just hanging out with the people you love. And this brilliantly illustrates that stark contrast. You might look like an absolute master juggler to the outside world, nailing your job, keeping up with chores, fulfilling all your social commitments. But the internal reality, it's a totally different story. Because the second those external responsibilities are met, people with high-functioning depression almost immediately withdraw and just shut down. You're essentially pouring every single ounce of your energy into holding up this external facade, leaving literally nothing in the tank for yourself once you're behind closed doors. Once you do withdraw, this very specific, punishing mental process takes over. Because you constantly feel like what you do is useless or that you aren't truly accomplishing anything of real value, your mind just shifts into overdrive. Welcome to the cycle of self-criticism. It's this relentless, invisible mental engine of self-doubt that just chips away at your energy every single day. You end up becoming your own harshest judge, jury, and executioner.
When we look closely at this internal engine, the warning signs are actually really clear. First off, you're constantly overanalyzing situations. You live in absolute fear of wasting time, just like we talked about earlier. But on top of that, you set impossibly high expectations for yourself, and you're constantly pushing yourself way past your natural limits. Think about it. You are operating on a totally empty tank, yet demanding peak, perfectionist performance from yourself. And when you inevitably struggle to maintain that impossible standard, well, it feeds right back into that cycle of self-criticism. It is just so deeply exhausting. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it validates a feeling so many of us try to hide. Overthinking isn't just a quirky personality trait here. It's a genuine recognized symptom. It really doesn't matter if a problem is massive or incredibly minor. You'll catch yourself overanalyzing the situation from absolutely every conceivable angle. You spin it around and around in your head until a mental breakdown or a moment where you just completely crack under the pressure becomes practically inevitable. You're not crazy. The pressure is real.
And perhaps the most tragic part of this whole internal struggle is the emptiness of success. Seriously, you can climb the corporate ladder, get straight A's, have a perfectly pristine home, but the reward center in your brain just isn't lighting up like it should. Psychologists point out that if you feel sad or empty the vast majority of the time, even when you're actively doing fun things or hitting your goals, that is a massive red flag for high-functioning depression. The external success simply cannot fill that internal void.
So, the crucial point is this deeply validating realization. It is not normal to live your life feeling empty, sad, and constantly criticizing yourself. If you take literally nothing else away from this explainer today, please just remember that. Because people with high-functioning depression don't act like typical depressed patients. They often trick themselves into believing they're actually fine. But the expert consensus is completely unequivocal here. Living in a state of constant emptiness and self-attack is not the default, and you absolutely do not have to just accept it.
What really complicates all of this is the profound isolation of feeling so completely misunderstood. Because you can hold down a job, manage a house, and take care of your responsibilities, the people around you tend to drastically underestimate the sheer scale of your anxiety. Society looks at you and kind of just minimizes your feelings, simply because you don't fit that classic cinematic mold of what a depressed person should look like. And wow, it is incredibly lonely to be suffering so loudly in your own head, while the rest of the world just assumes you've got it all perfectly together.
Because that internal pressure is just so overwhelmingly high, and because you feel like you can't show it to the outside world, your mind naturally, desperately starts seeking out invisible ways out. You need an escape valve for all that stress. But since you're trying so hard to maintain the illusion of being highly functional, these escapes usually happen in private, which unfortunately often leads to some pretty unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Let's move to and see how this builds, step by step. It usually starts with severe emotional exhaustion. You're just totally burned out from keeping up the act. To cope with that intense stress, a lot of people turn to alcohol or drugs, basically developing self-destructive habits just to force their brain to think about something else for a minute. And then comes adopting quote-unquote too many hobbies. Now, hobbies sound great, right? But in this context, it usually means excessive video gaming or constantly binge-watching TV shows. While those activities seem perfectly normal on the surface, the core problem is that you're using them purely as a desperate way to escape your reality.
But here is the good news. Recognizing these patterns, the overthinking, the exhaustion, the escapism, that is the absolute first crucial step to breaking the silence. See, high-functioning depression thrives in the dark. It actively thrives on making you believe that just because you're getting your work done, your internal suffering somehow doesn't matter or isn't real enough to ask for help. Well, we are here today to completely shatter that myth.
So what exactly is the path forward? First, you've got to recognize that you are not fine just because you are functioning. Functioning is surviving, sure, but it is definitely not thriving. Second, you have to honestly acknowledge the symptoms we've uncovered today. Stop brushing them off. And finally, as the experts suggest, you must seek to find the true origin of your depression. You can't just slap a Band-Aid on the surface-level burnout. You've got to dig down to the root cause. Because it's really only by addressing that origin that you can begin to live a life that is genuinely, truly happy.
Which leaves us with a really critical question for you to ponder. Have you ever experienced these symptoms or maybe even been formally diagnosed with high-functioning depression? If so, what methods have you tried to pull yourself back up? I highly encourage you to share your stories and your recovery methods because speaking up is exactly what chips away at the stigma. Let this explainer be your daily reminder. Your internal mental health is just as important as your external achievements. Seriously, don't let your ability to function rob you of your right to actually feel good. Thanks so much for joining me.